These new troops arrived in late September. After conducting a personal reconnaissance mission around the area, Zubayr pointed out something to Amr which the general seemed to have missed. Still present about 10 miles behind the Muslim army was the Roman garrisoned city of Heliopolis. If coordinated correctly, these troops could smash into the Muslims from behind if Theodorus launched any attack from Babylon. To remove this potential threat, Amr led a large portion of his 12,000 soldiers to Heliopolis, leaving just enough at the fortress to keep the Romans on their toes. Upon approaching the walls, however, some of the garrison's cavalry contingent emerged from the city and beat some of Amr's horsemen in a brief engagement. Nevertheless, they were forced to pull back inside the walls as the city was besieged. Only a short time after investing Heliopolis, Zubayr and a small unit of hand-picked warriors scaled the walls in a dashing maneuver and breached the city. Seeing this, and realizing that the result of the clash was inevitable anyway, Heliopolis' garrison sued for peace and paid the jizya, after which Amr and Zubayr returned to Babylon. In their absence, the Romans had driven away the Muslim detachments closest to the trench and re-established their positions beyond it. Theodorus, likely realizing that he wasn't going to have the luxury of simply waiting the invaders out, began employing the Muslims' own tactics against them, launching daily raids through the Roman bridgeheads. Although the Romans generally lost more men in these scattered engagements, they could afford to, while Amr could not. The stalemate went on relatively unchanged until a revered Arab officer, Kharija bin Huzafa, approached Amr with a risky but potentially decisive plan to win the battle. That night, Kharija was given a cavalry regiment and ordered to lay his trap, which he did by riding around to the southern spur of a featureless ridge on the eastern side of the field. After quietly taking up a concealed position relatively close to the Romans' ditch, the Muslim cavalry waited. As Huzafa suspected, when morning came, the Roman forces crossed the trench in force and deployed for battle. The Muslims arrayed opposite them. When both sides were ready, Theodorus launched his attack across the front, pushing Amr, who ordered his army to retreat from Babylon with suspicious ease. It was in reality a feigned retreat. When the melee had moved far beyond Babylon's defensive trench, Kharija's mounted contingent galloped out from their hiding place behind the ridge and occupied the crossing areas which Theodorus would have to use for any retreat. Amr, seeing that his horsemen were in place, countercharged with immense ferocity, driving the Romans back towards their own fortifications. Hearing the given signal, Kharija also launched his assault, crashing straight into Theodorus' rear, hemming the Romans in and then encircling them. Many defenders were killed, but a few Roman units turned and burst through Huzafa's cavalry, managing to re-secure the crossing points. The remnants of the Roman army at Babylon retreated across the trench, pursued closely by Amr's forces, who continued their attack up to the very walls of the fortress. Fighting continued in the space between the ditch and the citadel proper, until the gate was closed from inside. Those who got in were the lucky ones, as not a single Roman soldier remained alive on the field of battle. The morale of Cyrus, who was not a military man by profession, and the Roman soldiery as a whole, was completely shaken by this stark defeat, and to the prefect, it was clear that peace had to be concluded. To make matters even more dire, Amr somehow got his hands on a few catapults and used them to launch deadly boulders, softening up the defenses. When this began happening, Cyrus departed Babylon with a small escort and took up residence on the mid-river island of Rauda, from which the fortress was being. Then the Coptic prefect dejectedly sent word to the Muslims that he wished to treat with them. Envoys were exchanged back and forth between the two sides, and Heraclius' viceroy attempted to offer Amr a lavish bribe if the Muslims left Egypt, but the Arab commander responded by giving 3 options: conversion to Islam, payment of the jizya, or death. Cyrus favored capitulating in some form, but his Egyptian colleagues wouldn't have any of it, so the stalemate continued outside the impenetrable fortress. Since coming to terms with Cyrus was impossible, Amr went into Babylon with a few companions in order to speak with Theodorus. However, when he was entering the fortress, a Roman soldier muttered to him scornfully, "You have entered, now see how you get out." Correctly believing orders had been given for him to be killed upon exiting the conference, Amr tricked his way out of the fortress, convincing Theodorus that he was going to bring even more of his generals unwittingly into the trap. These attempts at ending the siege failed, and the gridlock outside Babylon continued. But finally, in mid-December, the observant Zubayr noticed that since most of the fighting had taken place on Babylon's north side, the riverside Gate of Iron and its 2 guard towers were relatively undefended. Just like that, the Muslims had found a key to Theodorus' citadel. Swiftly putting his infiltration plan into action with Amr's blessing, Zubayr assembled a unit to conduct the operation. On the moonless, clear night of December 20th, 640, most of the Muslim army arrayed quietly outside the Gate of Iron, while Zubayr and his comrades climbed ladders up the wall. Then, when some of his men were gathered on top, a deafening Islamic battle cry was sounded, echoed by the entire army, causing shock and panic amongst defenders who had no idea what was happening. Amidst the chaos, Zubayr slew the gatehouse sentries and broke the chain which held the gate closed, allowing Amr and the Muslim army to flood inside. While some of the more elite Roman formations made a brave last stand, most of their comrades routed towards the Nile. Once they reached the riverbank, the soldiers crossed to the safety of Rauda on pre-prepared boats, which ferried soldiers back and forth throughout the night. Among those who fled was Theodorus, who managed to escape Amr's grasp and run back to Alexandria. The next day, Cyrus sued for and obtained peace for the Copts on Muslim terms, agreeing to pay the jizya and submit the entire country to Islamic rule. The Romans in Egypt could either accept and remain, or reject and depart. Unsurprisingly, when Heraclius received a letter from Cyrus seeking the imperial stamp of approval for his peace with Amr, the emperor was furious and categorically refused, responding with a message full of scorn and insults. To ensure that an active defense of Egypt continued despite the prefect's treachery, Heraclius had other messages ordering firm resistance delivered to all of his Roman generals in Egypt, who obeyed their sovereign without question. Cyrus, disavowed by the Romans, put himself and the Copts under Amr's command, promising the Muslims administrative and engineering assistance. Memphis was now secure, and the push towards Alexandria could begin. After the fall of Babylon to Rashidun forces in December 640, Amr ibn Alas kept his army stationed in the area for a while, dispatching word to Caliph Umar of his triumph and requesting permission to continue the conquest towards Alexandria. This pause also gave his army a much-needed rest. In Constantinople, the elderly and sickly Emperor Heraclius reacted to the latest Muslim victory by ferrying several thousand more imperial reinforcements to Egypt over the Mediterranean. They had clear orders: protect Alexandria at all costs. Upon making landfall at the provincial capital, these reinforcements and the existing Alexandrian garrison, possibly under Theodorus' command, began working to strengthen the city fortifications and fanning out to defensible positions en route to the city. Reports of these preparations made it south to Amr. At about the same time, a messenger arrived from Arabia with the Caliph's order to advance and seize Alexandria. So, leaving a small garrison to hold down Babylon and keep the Memphis region in check, Amr gave orders for his men to break camp. The 12,000-strong Muslim army headed northwards in February 641. Marching along the Nile Delta's western fringe, immediately adjacent to a familiar desert climate, the Muslims overcame light Roman resistance at Tanut and Qaum Sharik before turning northwest away from the river. After subsequently capturing Sultaeus, Amr then won a bloody victory at Kion, just 12 miles away from Alexandria, and chased the defeated Roman forces to the city's eastern approach. The march to the sea had taken just 22 days. Alexandria had been built by Alexander the Great and his Ptolemaic successors on a relatively narrow strip of land, bounded to the north by the Mediterranean Sea and in the south by Lake Mayut. Since the main transportation routes ended east of the city, the only truly vulnerable approach was the northeastern one. The Muslims made camp outside weapon range and then deployed for battle, slowly advancing towards the recently reinforced Alexandrian walls. Unfortunately for Amr, such a careless preliminary move allowed the expert Roman artillerists to disrupt and scatter his units with volley after volley of massive catapult stones. This bombardment sent Amr and his warriors back to camp, dodging missiles all the way. Such attacks continued with intermissions, and in these intermissions, the Roman defenders would instead launch sorties out of the city and attack the Muslim army, aiming to throw it back and end the siege. Despite the ferocity and competence of the men carrying them out, these attempts failed consistently and ended up being pushed back into the city. At some point during the first months of indecisive action, the defenders sortied out against a section of the front manned by the Arabian Mara tribe, and a fierce clash began. It seemed to have concluded as an indecisive draw, but the Mara lost a man whose head was subsequently cut off and taken away by the Romans, much to the Arabs' fury. The next morning, the same thing happened. A Roman officer, probably made confident by the previous day's action, launched an attack on the Mara, but this time the outcome was very different. After being killed in the fighting, his head was taken by the Arab warriors and used as a bargaining chip to get their comrade's head back. After a brief negotiation, both sides made an exchange and buried their kinsman with honours. At the height of summer, around 2 months after Amr initially constructed his camp, the Sami tribal commander decided to shift it forwards for reasons which we are not aware of. However, as his forces were moving, the Roman defenders sensed an opportunity and mounted a daring cavalry attack, which nevertheless was easily repulsed. A reckless Muslim cavalry detachment set out in hot pursuit of the fleeing Romans, and actually got inside the city just before the defenders could close the gates behind them. Heavily outnumbered, they fought a fierce skirmish at the so-called Church of Gold, in which some of them were killed and the rest were pushed out of Alexandria. Heraclius, who maintained constant contact with Alexandria, was all too aware that the Muslims were gaining momentum. Worried that all of Egypt was about to be lost, he gathered a formidable army across what remained of the empire, together with equipment and supplies. Just before this giant emperor-led relief armada was about to set sail, Heraclius died in Constantinople at the age of 66, leaving his eldest sons, Constantine III and Heraclonus, as joint heirs. This initiated a round of imperial politicking which didn't allow the empire to react at the worst possible moment.